Will you please put your hands together for Mr. Brandon Spars, ladies and gentlemen.
So I lived and worked in Indonesia for 6 years, and it was in Bali that I met a beautiful young lady. We fell in love. She didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Indonesian. And naturally, we decided to get married. On the day of our wedding, as we were filing in to her family's garden where the ceremony was going to take place, there was this awful, terrible shouting and yelling. That was because my future father-in-law had locked his own mother in one of the bedrooms. You see, years before, he had converted to Catholicism, whereas she, along with the rest of the extended family, like most Balinese, had remained Hindu. When she refused to stop preparing offerings she considered necessary for any wedding, that was when he banned her. He banned his own mother from her granddaughter's wedding. My parents made the trip out from California to Bali. My father, referring to the shouting, asked, "What on earth is that?" But my mother hissed, "Be quiet, Byron." She didn't know the first thing about Bali or Indonesia, what was part of the exotic culture, or what was simply part of a dysfunctional family dynamic. A Catholic priest had to be driven 3.5 hours from the nearest city, and he took his position in front of us all in the garden, and with the grandmother still shouting and screaming, the wedding ceremony began. At a certain point, however, the shouting stopped. But that was when I began to notice rustling coming from this bush right next to me. And through a gap in the foliage, I caught sight of an eye staring back at me. It was the grandmother. She had escaped from the bedroom and snuck in as close as possible, bearing with her the most essential Hindu wedding offering, the sacrifice of a live pig. Just when I was supposed to say my one line, "I do," this hosey, squealing erupted from the bush. My father-in-law was on his feet. He had not underestimated his own mother. And he gave a signal, and 2 men I'd never seen before who'd been at the ready descended on the bush, but all they succeeded in doing was let loose the hog, which rocketed out of the bush straight at the priest, who struck dramatic poses of great terror as the animal shot past him, looking for some portal of escape. But finding none, began to run the perimeter of the garden, bleeding profusely from its throat. "What the hell is going on?" my father demanded. But my mother was quick. "Be quiet, Byron. You need to be more open-minded." I have never seen my father-in-law so angry. He was black with rage. He was trembling from his head to his toe. And when that animal passed in front of him, the ground shook. His calf muscles pumped up and down his legs like dribbling basketballs as he sprang into action. Was the sound of the swoop of his mighty leg, and pop! As he connected with the animal just below its rib cage. He tried to kick that thing out of the garden. But it didn't go anywhere. It flopped in the dust right in front of him, completely lifeless. You see, the force of the blow had been transmitted to the weakest link, and a spray of blood shot out of the pig all over the priest. He looked at his hands, and then the white robes of the Catholic Church, no longer white, and then threw open his arms and began to wail, "Oh!" And everyone rushed to comfort him. I held my sobbing bride. My father-in-law locked himself in his bedroom and didn't come out for 3 days. To this very day, you cannot breach the subject of this wedding. It has become fixed permanently in his memory as a total disaster. My wife and I, we've learned to laugh about it more and more. The bad wedding ceremony has resulted in many years of a very good marriage. We have 2 beautiful children. My mother, far from seeing it as a disaster, and in spite of telling her countless times to the contrary, has over the years managed to convince herself that the wedding had been fascinating and beautifully choreographed. On our 20th anniversary, we had a party, and to our horror, she stood up and gave a toast in which she recalled what she thought to be the climax of the wedding, how everyone sprang from their seats and shouted with joy as the grandmother made her grand entrance from behind the bush. And then, wiping away a tear, she added she could only hope people would remember to include her in such a meaningful way at the wedding of her grandchildren. All we could do was assure her we would try. Thank you very much.